Welcome to the Motherhood Village podcast. I am on with a very, very special guest. I have Lael Stone, who is a mom of three, a speaker, an educator, and an author, as well as a podcaster. Lael, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Yes, thank you for coming on. So, you're an educator, you're a speaker. Also, tell my listeners also a little bit just more about you of what you speak about, what your book that you've
Mm.
written, and then we'll dive into our full conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Well, I've been working with families for close to 20 years now. I started working in birth many, many years ago. I was a childbirth educator for a long time and I was a doula, and then started working really mainly in the postnatal space, particularly for people that had trauma. I then moved into working as a parenting educator, so running workshops and online courses and speaking and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, our podcast is the Aware Parenting Podcast, where we talk all about, ways to stay connected with our kids. 3 years ago, I built a school, which, I know sounds really quite crazy. People are like, what? I often still think, wow, I can't believe we built a school. It took many years to do, but our school really is based all on emotional awareness. So the whole foundation of the school is on helping children to feel seen and heard. We're big on choice and autonomy. We have non-punitive discipline, and we really focus
Wow.
on how children all learn best. We do a lot of play-based learning in our school, and yeah, it's a pretty amazing place. So created that school, and yeah, recently we just released our book, Raising Resilient and Compassionate Children, which is really all about how do we help our children thrive in the world. So a lot of it is about looking at, just tools and ways to help our kids connect with themselves, to express their feelings in healthy ways, to be compassionate humans and citizens of this earth. And, another part of it is really looking at our stuff as a parent. So a lot of my work is around what I call imprints and the way we were raised and how that impacts how we parent, because no matter whether we like it or not, the way that we were raised does have an impact on how we turn up for our kids. And so a lot of my work is looking at what happened to us as a kid, the imprints and stories we got. Are some of those working for you? Are some of them not? How we can shift and change it, our relationships to many things like anger and tears and trust and care and boundaries and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And as we look at that and can unpack a bit of our own story, then it allows us to turn up in the way that we want for our kiddos. So that's what I do. And I have three kids, but two of them are
Yes.
adults now. So they're doing their own beautiful thing in the world. I've just got one 15-year-old at home with us.
Oh,
So yeah, it's a beautiful, busy life.
I love it. And tell me, so are you familiar with micro schools in the United States? Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
We have like our public school system, we have private school, and then we have micro schools that basically it's like a homeschool,
Okay.
but not really.
Yeah.
It's it's basically so one in particular is called the Kind Academy. That's the first one that comes to me. But they do play-based learning. It's smaller classrooms,
Mm,
a lot of nature, very similar to what you're describing. The
yeah.
reason why I mentioned homeschool is because since COVID, homeschooling just erupted, but a lot of mothers have now looked for the micro schools. We've possibly
Yes.
talked about that. But I love that. That's
Mm,
fantastic. I know we can probably be here forever talking about all the different aspects of what you do. But the reason why I brought you on was because I saw your TEDx talk, which was, I believe, how to raise emotionally intelligent children. I had
mhm,
searched that because I am still new to motherhood. My son is
mm,
just 5 years old, but
mhm,
because of the world that we're in, I think it's even
mm,
more pertinent now than ever that we
mm.
need to be connecting with our children, raising
Yes.
emotionally intelligent children. So I searched and you came up and
Mm,
I was blown away, loved the conversation. Before we
mm,
dive into that, though, let's do my icebreaker round because I love
mhm,
these three questions. I think they're very important because I say it takes a village to uplift a mother. And part of that is resources. So, is there a book?
mm,
Is there a podcast? What would you recommend
mm.
to a mom listening to this of some books that have helped you along your journey?
Mm. Okay, well, I couldn't not pitch my own book. So if you
Yes,
want
of
some
course.
support, you can check out my book. Look, I think I've been so beautifully influenced by many amazing people who have worked before me. You know, the work of Dr. Aletha Salter. So she wrote The Aware Baby and Cooperative and
Mm,
Connected and Tears and Tantrum. Like those books were very pivotal for me in my motherhood journey, just helping me to understand feelings and emotions and helping our kids heal from stress and trauma. So I found her work really, really beautiful. I found the book, one of the kind of game changer books for me as a woman was the book Vagina by Naomi Wolf,
mm,
which was
mhm.
and I highly recommend every woman read that book, which is really again about just who we are as women and our connection to ourselves, which also, you know, impacts our mothering and those kind of things. So that's has been a very, very influential book for me. I love the work of Dr. Gabor Mate and his books as well. Hold On to
I
Your
heard him
Kid
on your
is a brilliant book.
podcast.
Yeah, it
Yes.
was really amazing to speak to him. So I do love his work out there in the world. So I think the main influences for me have been understanding trauma and understanding our own stories. You know, that's always really been a point of deep curiosity for me as a mother, because you know my thoughts have always been, well, how do I raise my kids to be really amazing, excellent humans, right? And how do I not
Yes.
stuff them up? And so I think through all of those inquiries, you know, finding, you know, books like that and just being really curious about my own story and healing that has helped to be able to raise them to be who they need to be.
And actually, you saying that made me think, what's that quote? You can't move forward if you don't know where you're from. So I feel like, how can
Mm,
we help our
mm,
children if we don't know,
mm.
right? Our triggers, where our triggers affect. That's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm fascinated with all of this stuff, because I think that's the hardest part of motherhood,
Yeah,
managing our everything in trying to raise an emotionally intelligent, happy, healthy, thriving human being. But
yeah.
we'll again dive into
Definitely.
that. How has motherhood transformed you?
Oh, it's been the biggest spiritual practice of my life. I often say
Yeah.
that if you want to, you know, become a spiritual person, you could go and meditate on a mountain for 10 years, or you can try and raise your kids consciously, right? And like,
Yes,
I'll
yes,
tell you which one's harder. The raising the kids, right? It's, you know,
yes.
for me, it's, I think it's the most magnificent mirror, motherhood, into
Mm,
all our own shadows and our stories. It teaches us about deep servitude of caring
yes.
for another. It really challenges who we think we are in the world. You know, I often think when we become mothers, we go through this like death of the ego, this loss of identity, and particularly
Oh,
because our
yes.
culture does not really acknowledge and celebrate mothers. You know, we're still a world that really just validates earning good money, driving a great car, looking really great, like mothering, which is one of the most intense jobs that's out there, which is really about shaping the next generation, is not given the regard and the support that it absolutely deserves. So I feel having to work through all those different layers of rage and anger at our
Yes.
system and our cultures, and to come back to a place of deep knowingness within myself, which my children have all given me and gifted me. Learning to be with my kids and their big feelings and trusting their journey has been the most beautiful gift in learning to trust myself and trust life.
I love that. So again, I say it takes a village to raise a child, but as you just even said, and how I've now come as I'm newly into motherhood, it really does truthfully, more importantly, take a village to uplift a mother, to then,
Yes.
as you said, raise our next generation. Who and what has been a pivotal part of your village?
Yeah, what's interesting actually, I was just recording a podcast with someone else this morning and they were asking me about those early years of motherhood. And, you know, I became a mum at 25, so quite young for these days. And I didn't have any friends that had children and I didn't really belong to any groups. And really, it was incredibly isolating doing it on my own. And I had one friend that I met who had a child the same age. And I think we clung to each other for dear life because we were the only ones going through it. And she became my absolute saving grace. You know, we would
Yeah.
talk nearly every day on the phone. We'd listen to each other's feelings. We would journey the depths together because, you know, it felt so overwhelming for both of us. So I think without doubt, you know, my dear friend was the one person to guide me through it. And then I think as time went on, you know, even when my children started school or growing and all that kind of stuff, you know, I was looking for like-minded people, and I must admit, I didn't really find it in the way that I wanted. I think because I was a young mom, I didn't feel like I really fitted in anywhere. And I think that actually what that did is then led me to doing a lot of this work, because I remember how hard it was
Mm,
and what I probably needed way back then. I probably needed someone like me back then, which is what
sure.
I didn't have. And so I think that has led me a lot to doing my work. So, yeah, I think those early years of mothering were pretty lonely and were tricky, because I don't think I asked for help. I don't think I prioritized my own self care. I was really just thinking, I've got to do this on my own, with my other friend, and that was about it. And as I look back now, I really have deep compassion for the younger version of Lael, who was doing the best job she knew at the time.
And let me ask, because now we are gonna jump into the main part of the conversation. Something hit me immediately. So you just said you have 3 kids, 2 are
Mm,
adults, 15. What is the difference in Lael when you had your first son at 25,
mm,
and then as you went on, I think was it Dr. Siggy? Are you familiar with Dr. Siggy in the United States?
mhm. I have heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I believe she's the one who said that basically you become a different mother every time you have a child,
Mm,
right? You're not the
mm,
same mother, right? And
yes.
I said, oh my God, yes, that's so true. So
Mm,
tell me, so you were just talking early stages of motherhood, you're trying to figure
mm,
out, you're young. What was
mm,
that evolution like from you as you were learning this and your journey? And
mm,
it'll go into the point of the
mm,
conversation is you be are when you became that first time mom and new into everything, what was that journey like when you said, okay, I want to create wellness in families through education, connection, and communication? I'm going to
mm,
learn about aware parenting. Tell me what that was
mm,
like and that stage from being a 25-year-old and then having children
mm,
later on.
mm. I think it's well, it kind of, the desire and quest, I think, to do it in a different way came from because it didn't feel good, because I didn't
Mm,
enjoy being a mum, because I was struggling, I was resentful and frustrated all the time. I wasn't getting my needs met, and really, I think of the young mum who was just trying to keep all the balls in the air, and it was all about, I think, on some level, appearances, to look like I had it all
of
together.
course.
Whereas really I was dying on the inside. And by the time I had my third baby, my oldest was 8 at that time and my middle daughter was 5. And we'd had a really challenging experience, my third baby and I. And we had a bit of a life or death birth situation. So
Mm,
when in that postnatal period, it was really just about survival. And I knew enough about trauma to go, what, this is going to have an impact on her and me. And that's actually when I started to do some work around
uh,
trauma and healing it. That's how I actually started to get into things like aware parenting and understanding trauma, because I was like, how do I help my baby heal from this experience, and how do I help myself? And so that's, I think, what opened up a whole door for me around, oh, there's a whole other way to parent. There's a whole other way to be with feelings and emotions, not try and, pretend they're not there or shut them down, or,
sure.
try and keep my kids happy all the time. It was really about learning how to be and sit in the fire, and sit in the uncomfortable. And so I think that beautiful gift that my third baby gave me of diving into trauma and healing really set me on the path of, I guess, becoming the mother I wanted to be. And what she started to look like was taking care of herself and her needs. It was
Mm,
doing a lot of work on her past and the wounds that I had sitting there from when I was younger and healing them. It was learning to be with my kids' big feelings and emotions, and really attune to them in a whole deeper level, so I can just trust their journey and their experience and be present for
sure.
that. It really did shift a lot of where my life was. It taught me to slow down a whole of a lot more, to be really present with my kids. And now, as they're adults and amazing humans in the world, I look back and go, it was the best thing I ever did, because it allowed, I think, both my husband and I to slow down a bit and really be present and really ask, who do we want our kids to be in the world? Like, what do we want for them? And our guiding value was, we want them to be deeply attached to the truth of who they are. We
Yeah.
want them to have such a strong sense of self. So how do we do that? Well,
Yes.
we create and allow space for them to be who they need to be. All parts of them, the angry parts, the sad parts, the happy part, the joyous parts.
Yes.
We keep working on our own stuff so we don't project it onto them. We welcome, their unique spirit and how they learn best and all those kind of things. So it was really about sitting in our uncomfortableness of, how we think they should be in the world or what we think it should look like. And then they would come back and go, well, actually, this is who I am. And we'd be like, okay, so let's reassess again. So I feel like it was so rich in just helping me to get closer to the truth of who I am so my kids could be the truth of who they are.
I love that. And actually, you had me thinking when you said being uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times for any mothers listening to this, I think that's another part that's very hard is sitting in that uncomfortable when we see our children being uncomfortable. I'm going to
Oh,
say a
yeah.
small example, and it's going to lead into my next question. So, yesterday, my husband and I went to tennis. We have tennis almost every Tuesday. It's like clockwork. I do a lot of the work. I talk to a lot of mental health counselors, therapists. I read, I do the work. So I'm aware of to some extent. So I prepared him, picked him up from school. Hey, baby, we have tennis, just reminding you. And the tears just came. I hate when you have tennis. Why do you have to leave me? We don't even have time together because you're at work and I'm at school. So for a
Mm.
brief second, I'm driving. And I said, okay, do I cancel tennis
Yeah,
or
yeah.
do I allow him,
Mm.
as uncomfortable as this is for both of us and me seeing him
Yeah,
screaming, or do I let him have that moment and say,
yeah,
you know what, buddy? I completely understand. I
yeah.
know, baby, mommy, I love to spend time with you. And I am,
Mm.
and I promise you, as soon as tennis is over, we're going to hug and hang, and all those things.
Mm.
But that uncomfortableness, oh, that's hard when we see our
Mm.
children in pain
Yes.
and going through that. So I know I handled it that way, but tell me a little bit of where that comes from of parents hearing that. And when we're hearing that, I handle that okay at that moment. I don't always do that, right? If I'm thinking about the email I have to send, if I'm thinking about the client I have to help, if I'm thinking about this,
Mm.
I don't have time to be
Mm.
mindful, peaceful, whatever the word is.
Yeah,
So speak on that a little bit of
yeah,
where moms can get that when we're like erratic or things are
yeah.
going on crazy around us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think firstly, well done, Nicole. You did beautifully.
Oh,
You just allowed him to feel what he was feeling. And I
yeah.
think it's such a beautiful point to bring that up because so often we just want to fix what's going on for our kids. It feels
Yes.
uncomfortable for us watching them be uncomfortable. And it's our discomfort that we need to learn to work with because we do our children no favors by fixing life for them. They
Yeah.
have to experience tricky stuff. They have to experience adversity. The difference between a child that thrives through doing tricky stuff is if they have a loving, compassionate adult beside them who says, tell me more. And what does that
Hmm.
feel like? And gosh, that sounds hard. And is there to listen to them, let out all their feelings about it. Because as they let out all their feelings, then usually they're like, oh, okay, that feels better. And now I can open myself up to what we do next or what the possibility
Yeah.
exists. So learning to listen without fixing is just one of the most challenging things that we can do, and I,
Yeah.
I spent 5 years working with teenagers many years ago, teaching sex education to teens in secondary schools. And one of the questions I would ask all the teens always was, if you could change anything about your parent or you wish there was something that they would know, what would it be? And I would say 85% of the kids said all the same thing, which was, I wish they would just listen. But they wanted three things with the listening. The first was they wanted their parent to listen without judging. So they didn't want, the parent saying, oh, but, that person is bad to hang out with.
Yeah.
But that teacher's not very clever or whatever. They didn't want any of the judgment. The second thing they wanted, which is what you've just said, they wanted to be heard without being fixed. And that
Yeah.
was one of the things that was the trickiest for the teens, is that I want them to just listen to me. I don't want them to offer me a solution. If I want a solution, I'll ask for a solution. And that
Mhm.
is so hard to do as a parent, is to not fix. And I say to all parents all the time, when your child is sharing something with you, like, be quiet and just nod and go, gee, that
Poker
sounds
face.
tricky.
I always
Tell
say
me
I call
more.
it poker face. Just
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Tell me more. And then at the end, when they're finished talking, you could say, do you want some solutions or did you want me to just listen? And if they say, I want you to just listen, even if you have the best solution on earth, do not offer it, because they really are just wanting to be heard in those moments. And then the third thing they wanted was the listening, was that their parents would listen to them without freaking out, without going, oh my God, this is so full on and just over the top, because the message the teen got was, oh, whoa, you can't handle this. All right, I won't bring this to you next time. So,
Mhm.
what we're talking about here is, and I know, a lot of people may still have little kids, right? That learning
Yes.
to listen well and be in that space with them, it's a long game we're playing here, because you are setting up this beautiful foundation for your children so that when they are teens, they know you are the safe place to come. They
Sure.
know that they can bring these feelings and share these thoughts with you around everything, and that you're going to be like, yep, I've got you. Tell me more. Let's talk about it. So I think that is just so pivotal, that piece of learning to listen well. I've totally forgotten what your question was about because I went off on a
No, you
tangent.
answered it. No, you
Oh, okay,
completely
good.
answered it. You did.
Okay.
And basically, it was like giving tips of how. And I think
Mm,
even if we are in a crazy mood, just listen.
mm,
We don't have to solve it. I think a lot of times
yes.
we do get heightened because we think we have to, oh, well, let's just do, or whatever. And it's like, to your point, but why even get, just listen and say, okay.
Mm,
But
yeah.
to your point, your other point is we don't like to see the uncomfortableness, but then it goes back to what is triggering in us. What work do we have to do on ourselves that him or her doing this affects that way? Before I get into my question about what is an aware parenting instructor, because I was fascinated by that and I've listened to your podcast, I did want to mention, I think a lot of times, I think what would help mothers as well is parent how you wish you would have been parented as well to with your children. So one of
Mm,
the things I love my mom dearly, we talk every day, but one of the things she also doesn't do is listen and let me be uncomfortable. She wants to fix, and I've noticed that as a grown woman who will be 40 this year, and I always get a ting, right? Or if I have to tell her something and she goes, oh, well, that's going to be difficult. And I'm like, in my mind, but I didn't say that. I just said this, or there's already a negative notation, or, oh, and I'm like, uh, I say all that because I'm like, it's the same patterns, right? Those same patterns, which then makes me say, you know what? This is why I try and do this with Jace, because I don't want 40 years later of his life, him getting tings of like, that doesn't really feel good. I just want you to listen, or whatever
mm,
that is. But that's me to fix with my mom, right? So that
yeah.
then I don't continue to push that over. Which goes
Mm,
into my question, the aware parenting instructor.
mm,
Explain the difference. And first of all, what that is, and you
mm,
hear mindfulness, mindful parenting, you hear peaceful
mm,
parenting, you hear conscious
mm,
parenting, all of these terminologies, which to my
mm,
opinion is all very similar. I think it's just
mm,
being present. But tell me, what does it mean to be an aware parent? What is an aware parenting instructor? And
mm,
what made you get into that level,
mm.
as opposed to other
Yeah.
aspects of it?
Yeah. Well, Aware Parenting was created by Dr. Aletha Solter. So she's a Swiss American psychologist. And so she wrote her first book, The Aware Baby, maybe 30 years ago or so
Oh,
now.
wow.
And she's written many books. I mean, I actually think she was probably really ahead of her time. Science has kind of caught up to what she was
30
talking about
years?
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really, I think, her work was based on three kind of main components. The first one is close attunement to our children and attachment. So it's things like, being attuned to them, and whether that's like wearing them on your body as a baby, and, breastfeeding and co sleeping and all that kind of beautiful, close, gorgeous attachment stuff we do. The second element was non punitive discipline. So, not using punishments and rewards to get our kids to do things, which, often when I say that to parents, they're like, okay, but what else do you do then if we don't do that? So, it's not using punishments and rewards. And the third thing, which I think is probably what makes it a little bit different to some of the other conscious parenting, is it's the understanding that we as humans, babies, children, can all heal from stress and trauma. And so,
Mm,
crying in loving arms and being present when our kids cry, and also using laughter and play to help shift
mm,
feelings and emotions, can help not only our children shift and move trauma, but also have a deeper connection with parent dynamic. So I think many of them are very similar in the sense of that it is very much about that compassionate presence that we have with children and accepting all of who they are. I worked as an aware parenting instructor for a long time. I don't so much anymore. But really, it's just about helping parents understand these philosophies and also tools to be able to work with their kids, whether it's getting cooperation or navigating big feelings and emotions, or it's helping kids sleep, or it's issues with food or whatever. We've all got stuff, right?
sure.
And it's support with those kind of things. And really, I guess from working with aware parenting for a long time, my work shifted when I started to build my school, and a lot of my work now really is about looking at the adult, not so much the child. So it's really looking at, well, what do we look at, as you mentioned before, we have to look at our past to know where we're going, to understand what happened for us when we were young, how we were responded to with feelings and
Sure.
emotions. What was our relationship to trust? What is our relationship to many, many different things? And when we can understand that, it helps us know more of our own story so that we can hopefully have less triggers when we are being with our kids.
You had said, and I believe it was from your TEDx talk about mental health, and I know mental health was a big, and I don't want to say passion for you, but something that you want to normalize discussing. I would
Mm,
say, and you had said 1 in 8 Australians deal with anxiety, 1 in 10 Australians deal with depression. Um, and it goes in how you're saying deeply rooted in how we express feelings of emotions. On the TEDx talk, How to Raise Emotionally Intelligent Children, explain why it's so important. And I think you've mentioned things, but how it then turns into adulthood, since now that's what you're in, why we have to be empathetic and compassionate with our own children and mindful of that approach and what that connection does bring um,
mm,
to future selves,
mm,
um, and how that helps to raise children who are more resilient than anything else, more emotionally intelligent, and then how that ties into the mental health aspect.
mm. Yeah, great question. So, I think I'll start with this. Like when we are little, we learn really quickly, the caregivers around us, whether it's safe to express ourselves or not. So if we're born to caregivers who don't tolerate anger or are uncomfortable with crying, we learn pretty quickly that that's not okay. Now, anger and crying and frustration and sadness, they're all part of being human. They're not negative emotions. They're just all part of being human. They're as valid as joy and happiness and passion and all those
Sure.
kind of things, right? So, what often happens is as children, we learn pretty quickly, can these caregivers navigate my big feelings? And if they don't, then we need to find something to do with those big feelings. And so, a lot of the time, what happens is we learn to repress them, we learn to push them down. And children will do this, and babies will even do this, teens do it, adults do it. We learn ways to cope with our feelings. And that can look like wanting to eat every time we're upset. It can wanting to be on screens all the time. It can be constantly moving, like we can't sit still because if we do, the feelings come up. It can be anything. For adults, it can be
Sure.
drinking too much wine, eating too much ice cream, online shopping, all these things that we do to stop ourselves from feeling. Like we learn to numb our feelings. So when we're little children, if we grow up in an environment where it's stressful, or even if it's not even stressful, but it's just not tolerated to express your feelings, we have to develop ways to protect ourselves. So we learn different techniques. This could be sucking a thumb. It could be dependent on a blanket or a toy or a teddy or all
Sure.
those kind of things. And what happens is we learn to numb those feelings. Now, again, that can become pretty dangerous in the teenage years as teenagers grow and a lot of their feelings come up. If they learn it's not okay to express them, then they're going to look for things to numb them. And that can look like drugs and vaping and drinking and risky sexual behavior and all that kind of stuff, right? Because they're like, I don't want to feel, so, let's just do this.
Mm.
So then we see the escalation, move into mental health, which is that when we aren't allowed to feel anything, we have to work so hard to push it down. We learn to numb, right? And when
Oh
we learn to
God.
numb, we can be depressed because it's not okay to feel. Or perhaps it develops into anxiety, which is I'm worried about what's going to happen. Particularly, if we grow up in environments where we're taught to be good boys and good girls, which means, I will give you love when you behave in the way that I approve of. And when you don't, I will take, my love away from you. Now that sets up a story in a child that says, I'm only lovable when I'm good. So then
Yeah.
what happens is we grow up into adulthood, and that story is still pretty ripe in our beings and bodies. And what happens is when I'm going to try something new, well, I don't know if I can do that because people might not approve of me. It might not be okay. So then I might not be enough. And then we
Yeah.
have things like anxiety, or we're scared to take risks, or we're scared to step out of our comfort zone, or we won't leave things that aren't feeling good for us because at least I know it. And the known is often a lot safer than the unknown. And so, I'm giving a really kind of top level view here, but there's so many different elements that speak to when it's not okay to feel, the impact that it can have on us as we grow.
You just I literally just saw the connection. Like it's like I've understood it. How many times we've seen movies with drug addicts and you hear, oh, I just want to feel good. I need to escape. I just need to feel good. So
Yeah.
when you said that, just, I don't know, a minute or so ago where you said they just want to feel good because those, whatever, maybe they're feeling that bad for the day, but whatever some of those negative emotions are that we've been taught to think are negative and
Mm.
that we shouldn't have and we should repress, they need an outlet to express them. Some people do
Yes.
it in adrenaline. Now I
Mhm.
see really the connection, right? Some people have
Mhm.
adrenaline. Some people, when
Mhm.
they do the drugs, and they're always searching for that next high because they want to always stay up. But life is
Mhm.
not about up. Life has the winding
Mhm.
roads, which I think is so important to teach.
Mhm.
Let me ask. So I talked to an anxiety support coach, and she explained that anxiety can be something good depending on how we look at it, right? Anxiety is almost like that element of uh, not instinctual, but our anxiety can help us if there's fear, if we're recognizing
Yeah.
certain things. So she believes in the neuroscience of it, of like looking deeper and understanding that some anxiety might be there,
Mm.
but of course it's how we deal with it and
Mhm.
how we don't let it then multiply to bigger things. My son is 5, already
Mm.
experiencing some things with certain levels of anxiety on a small
Mm.
scale. Afraid of the dark.
Mm.
Anytime we talk about certain things, I mean, we literally have had conversations. He's like, "Mommy, I just can't. I can't be alone in my room right now." And I'm like, "Why? What if a
Mm.
bad guy comes in?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Jace, we turn the alarm on. What if the alarm doesn't work and the police don't come?" Like we've had this level. He's 5, and I know
Mm.
all the. Again, you have to ask the questions, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. What if a bad guy comes in? Like I'm like, what do I, And he's like, well, then what do we do? And I said, well, we call
Mm.
911. Well, what if the police don't get here in time? I
Mm.
said, well, then you know what? Mommy will fight back, and we have to do. I'm like, geez, like what do we say? So my question to you is for something like that, a 5-year-old who does have that know-how and asks, how do I help him relish in that anxiety that I see there and
Mm.
not let it turn into something bigger as he
Mm.
gets older?
Yeah. Look, it's at 5 years of age, that's a pretty rational fear, right? Because at that age, we're starting to go, oh my God, I could be in danger in life, and all those things. So sometimes we have these normal rational fears that happen as kids grow and develop. And other times we have, as you say, anxieties. And I love how you explained that about anxiety. I always see anxiety as like it's a part of you tapping on the window going, hello, hello, I'm just letting you know that something feels a bit off here. So I'm here. And what we often do is go, I don't want to hear you. Like, go away. We turn our back on the anxiety because
That's
we're
so
like,
true.
it feels too scary. But actually, if we turn towards it and go, thank you for warning me. Thank you for warning me that something is going on. Okay, let me assess here. Is this actually a threat and a danger? No, it's not, right? Is it connecting to me to the past with something where I felt a similar thing? Yeah, maybe it
Mhm.
is. And maybe I didn't get to process that or feel that in the way I needed to last time. So thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me know that something feels out of balance or something feels off in my being. And then I can ask the question, well, what do I need to do here to feel safe? Right?
Sure.
That's what it is, right? It's a beautiful messenger in the sense of coming back to your son, what's really powerful in a moment like that is information, which is like, yeah, let's break it down. Yes, I hear that you feel really unsafe. So let's go through the information to help us know how we feel safe.
Yeah,
And, it might be also something like, I remember feeling really scared when I was a little girl as well,
I
right?
say
Because
that.
it can feel really scary, when that happens. What would make you feel safe, sweetheart? What would help you and your body feel safe? Now, what that might be is he's like, well, I want the door to be open, or I want another light on, or I want this, or I want that, or whatever that's going to look like for him. And again, I think that the trick is that whenever our kids have fear or have anxiety, like we go into, oh God, this is not okay, instead of like, okay, we're just developing, we're learning new skills and new tools, how to navigate when stuff feels big for us, and having that beautiful conversation, not just going into it's fine, nothing's going to happen, mate, which I know you didn't do. So I love that you really heard him, is to give him that information, to really say, I hear your fears. Tell me what else. What else feels scary? And the more he gets to express how scared he feels, maybe he has a cry and he lets that go. Maybe then we work towards, well, what can help you feel safe as we do this? Then he knows there's this supportive adult around him who's holding that space to say, hey, fears are going to come up. Anxieties are going to come up. It's part of being human. And these are the ways that we can work through them, And then when he's 8, right, you'll talk back and go, remember when you were 5, darling, and you were really scared about being in your room? Yeah. And now at 8, he's really scared to join the basketball team because what if people are bigger and better than him? Yeah, I get that fear, buddy. It's really
Sure.
scary, isn't it? And it takes a lot of courage to be brave, but you just got to be brave for a few minutes to give it a go and then see what happens, and
Right.
every time our children do this, they develop resilience, they develop the ability to try things even if it's tricky, and even if it doesn't go the way he wants, then we're there to hold that space to hear how it feels.
And to your point, it goes back to the listening, the connect, the being aware, to empathize and and to be compassionate. Because going to the original point, if I say no, it's fine. As he grows up to be an adult, in his mind, he's like, I couldn't feel that. I feel an anxiety, but my mom told me I'm fine, but I'm not. So I'm freaking confused, right? Then the
Yes.
confusion, like it's all in relation and breaking it down like this. That's why these conversations, I'm so happy they're so normalized so that when that next generation, because like I said, I'm more scared just because I think we're in a technology. There's so many more things that our kids are being exposed to now at this age that it's even more so that I have to be present as much as I can for him.
Yeah.
There was something else you said and it slipped my mind for a second, but no, I love it. I obviously you can tell I'm very passionate about breaking this down. I think you keep saying the tools. I think parents need all the tools, not just moms, give a shout out to
Mm,
the dads. I think also trying to hold space and understanding how we can just connect with our children and whatever that looks like. Now,
mm,
what are some ways that you release, reset, and recharge to make sure that you can be the best that you can be for yourself and for everyone else that you support?
mm, mm. Well, look, I think over the years of being a parent and realizing I wanted to parent in a certain way and still work and all that kind of stuff, it became really clear to me that if I do not take care of my needs deeply, then nobody's going to get their needs met. So I always say, whoever is that center nucleus of the family, which often is the mother, we have to take care of her.
Sure.
For me personally, I'm all about quiet. Like what resets and recharges me is silence, which is weird because my husband loves music and so do all three of my children. So at any given opportunity, there could be four different music tracks and everyone's home. And I'm like, oh, turn it all off. I like the silence. That's a beautiful recharge for me. I think for me, I actually just need to be on my own, which helps me recharge. And, when I had little kids and when that was really tricky to do, sometimes that was like just having a bath by myself for 20 minutes. Sometimes
Yeah.
that was going for a walk on my own. I really find deep value in just speaking and sharing what's big for me because I feel that when I'm heard in that, then it helps me process and then I can open up to the possibility of whatever I need. So some listening time is, I find, really deeply valuable. But more than anything, like nature and silence is my medicine, I think. And I now kind of live my life in a way where I make sure I have that every day. And that for many years, I did the hustle and the juggle and the kept going in the business and the kids. And I was just like, I wasn't turning up in the way that I wanted to. And it really made me reassess, how can I do this so I can be the best version of me? And a lot of that came back to, okay, well, what do we need to do to meet your needs in order to be able to be the parent? I just don't think you can parent consciously unless you take care of yourself. You just can't.
I agree. And you had said something just now in saying that where you were like, you like quiet. I run evening support groups for working moms, and we usually have like a lead therapist come into different group and kind of the moms just love to kind of release, reset, recharge. And one of the things that came up was overstimulation. How
Mm.
overstimulated moms get, and that's another big term we hear. And there were some new moms to be, and they're like, "What the heck is that?" And I kind of brought the group back in. The therapist kind of brought it together, being like, look, we don't want to scare you, but the reality is you may. Everyone has, I think, different, postnatal, postpartum periods. I said, but there is something because moms, like you said, are the nucleus where if my son is saying mommy, 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 and then my husband wants to have a conversation, I'm like, "Oh, I can't. Like he already knows. I'm like, babe, you have to give me a second, or I have to look at my son. I'm like, one of you, just getting too much. And I find the quiet more. So I wonder what that is. Like I am interested to see as maybe time goes on if it's dived into more of why the overstimulation is such a big thing for us. Maybe it has something to do with our phones too, right? We're overstimulated in so many ways. And then we have this little person. It's a lot.
It's a lot, and let alone the mental load that we carry, right? So often, as women, and I don't want to gender this, but it usually is
No.
women, we've got the lists in our heads of, gosh, I've got to put the swimming enrollment form in, and then I've got to pay this, and then I've got to do that, and then I've got to pick up some potatoes, and then I've got to, and then I've got to, oh, what time is it? I've got to pick them up from kindergarten. And it's like we are constantly with the lists and the holding and the juggling of what we're doing. Now that is loud and busy. And then, as you say, when we pick up our phone and we're bombarded with so much information, that is a lot as well. Like, we are living in a really fast world. It's very different to the world that our
So
parents
fast.
were in, or let alone our grandparents, right? And I think this is where we have to learn how to have that beautiful discipline within ourselves to know how we work best, to be the best version of ourselves. Because, I realized many years ago, my children need a really calm, anchored mother, right?
Yes.
And I
Oof.
realized that my job was to be what I call spacious, which is that when they
Mm.
came home from school, I made sure I made myself available for a good hour, which is where they'd walk in and I'd be like, hey, how are you? Can I make you some food? Or I'd give you a hug. And I would just be there and be spacious for whatever they needed. Now, sometimes they'd walk in and they'd be like, here's what happened today. And they'd just dump it all on the table, right? Other times they'd be withdrawn. And I'm like, they need a bit of connection, a bit of play. I really was about just
Yes.
be spacious to greet whatever comes to me so that I can then meet them where they're at, help shift them if they need, so then they come back into balance and then we have a beautiful afternoon and evening. But I realized that I needed to make that spaciousness to be really present with them so that they could walk in and they could go, hey, here's where I'm at. And I'm able to read that. I'm attuned to that. I can help them shift whatever that is if they need that support, and then we all move on. I began to learn that is the way that we can work in harmony. That way I don't have to yell. That is the way that I'm not, nagging them to do things, and I'm able to be present and connected to them, because the more presence I bring to them, the more connection they feel, the more likely they are to, offload whatever they're carrying so they come back into their presence and centeredness. And then there's more cooperation, right? It works better for everybody. So it really, for me, was about, okay, spaciousness. How do I be spacious? And that was about reshifting kind of my work, right? So I worked between these hours, or I did this, or I got some support here. It was really about juggling things a bit to go, what is the priority here? The priority for me is to be as spacious as I can for my kids when I'm there. And that doesn't mean I have to play with them for 4 hours straight, right? It might just mean I'm there with them for an hour. We do some play for 20 minutes or something, and then I'll go off and make dinner, and they've had their cup filled and they're pretty content to go on with what they want. So it's about
Exactly.
learning how we all get our needs met.
Oh God, I love that. And to the point of learning what each of your individual children need, right? Then we go into the love language. Maybe to your point, some maybe just want the hug, some want the words of encouragement, some need the alone time to have the space. But it goes back of understanding and creating the space to where you can recognize this one needs this. I mean, goodness, you saying that gets me thinking. If you don't hold that space, then you have the teenager that when they are ready to talk and you're not available, and that happens more than once,
Mm,
resentment, and then all of the things that we
mm,
know that occurs in normal
mm,
relationships when their needs are not being met and they can't have that space. So, oh my gosh, it's so true. I recognize that with my son early on when he would need me and I'm in the middle of something, and I recognize if I just gave him 10-15 minutes of undivided attention, he would
yeah,
leave me alone. Or if I
that's
was on a
it.
podcast and I kept seeing him come in, if I just let him sit on my lap for like even 30 seconds to a minute, say hi, he wouldn't bother me the rest of the time.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so
It's like,
true, and
yeah.
I think it's look, I just say this to all parents. Parenting is hard. It's a juggle, right? We are not supported in the way that we should be as parents, and we're often doing it on our own in our houses, and it's really tricky. We need the village, exactly what you talk about, to support each other, to lift each other up. It's so vital and important, and I think it's coming back to, again, what we value, what we want for our children, and then how can we find and nourish that within ourselves to then be able to bring that to them.
I love it. So how can, as we wind down here, how can people connect with you and how people
Mm.
can work with you?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So, you can, if you Google Lael Stone, which is Laelstone, there's actually no other Lael Stones in the world. So I'm the only one that turns up, which is cool. Actually, there used to be one. She was a brain surgeon, but she died many years ago, I think. So it's just me there. So you can find me.
Oh,
So my website, laelstone.com.au, I just have lots of different courses and offers on there that you can find. You can find my book on there as well if you're interested in buying that. I run things called immersions, these 8-week immersions, which are for
I see.
parents to take them through all about their imprints, their relationship to, those, a lot of different themes that turn up in parenting, as well as guiding them to parent with lots of these tools around listening to feelings and using play and all sorts of beautiful stuff. So I usually run those 3 or 4 times a year, and I have people from all over the world join that. And then I have lots of other little webinars on my website that people can buy and watch, that just talk about some of these main topics. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Lael Stone. So all my info's there.
Love it. What are your final thoughts? Maybe to a new mom, or maybe not even a new mom, maybe a mom. You know what? What about to the mom that thinks it's too late, right?
Oh,
That
it's
thinks, oh,
never too late. Never, 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 never.
yes. So
I love
tell,
that you
so
asked
not
this
only the mom,
question.
yes. So to the
Yeah.
mom listening that thinks, oh my God, how did I not know this? My kid's older. It's too late. Talk to that mama right now.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I just want to say I didn't come to any of this kind of conscious aware parenting until my son was 8 and my middle daughter was nearly 5 and I had a baby, right? And when I came to it, I remember thinking, "Oh man, have I just messed all this up?" And then as I started to be spacious, as I started to listen to their feelings, as I started to do my own work, what was so incredible is everything that I think my older kids had held on to that needed to be healed just came to the surface. And so I absolutely 100% believe it is never too late for healing, ever, right? Can I tell you a quick little story, of
Sure.
this?
Yes, please.
So when my son was born, we had a bit of a tricky birth experience, and it was I was a new mum, and I was in shock, I reckon, for the first year of his life. I had a pretty terrible birth experience. I couldn't understand what had happened to me, and I was taking care of him, but I didn't feel connected to him. My beautiful husband stepped in and was just so deeply connected to him. I feel so grateful for that. But I was just like, oh my God, like, what is this? This is so full on. And so then as I started to journey more into this work and had more children, I felt this guilt that I didn't feel that connected to him when he was a baby, and I felt differently towards my other children. And I really had a lot of story there around how I didn't do it right, until I actually started to move into compassion for myself, of like, you did the best job you knew how at the time, right? And you were doing all that you could. And as I started to move into compassion, I actually just kind of put it out there. I am so willing to heal whatever needs to happen with my beautiful boy. Like, I'm just going to put it out there, and I'm going to trust him and trust timing, that when we need to heal, we'll heal. Now, one day, I reckon he was nearly 10 years of age. We were at my in-laws, and it was a hot day, and all the cousins are there, and we're all swimming in the pool, and everyone gets out of the pool except my son and I. And my son swims over to me and he goes, Mum, he goes, hold me like a baby. And I'm like, oh, okay, darling. So here's this like 10-year-old boy, he's in my arms, and he starts like pretending he's a baby. And so I really trust children when they play or what they do. There's something in it for them. So I start like going, oh, you're my beautiful baby, and you are so precious, and I love you so much, and you are just the sweetest thing, and I'm glad you're here. And I just start, and he's like giggling and laughing, pretending he's my baby. And then he says to me, Mum, just hold my head and let me float. And so he lays in front of me in the pool, and I'm holding his head in my hands, and he's laying there floating in complete silence for about 10 minutes. And I am standing there holding his head, and I am just crying
I'm
because
crying now.
I am
Oh
feeling
my
in
God.
this moment, oh my God, this is the healing, right? In this beautiful moment here, when we are both open and ready, there is like this healing, this forgiveness. It is all okay. And that just happens for like 10 minutes. And then he just kind of gets up and he gives me a kiss. He goes, oh, I'm going to go eat something. And then he just goes off, right?
You're
And I'm
rocked. You're rocked. You're like, what the heck?
I'm in the pool going, did anybody see that? Like, this was just like a rebirth we just had. And it was so profound. And I've had many experiences like that with all my children over the time, right? Not things that I could orchestrate or make happen. It's been on their timing, when they're ready, when I'm ready. And I've had so many experiences like that. And even with all the clients I've worked with who's voiced back many similar experiences, I'm like, it is never too late to heal. And we just have to be open to healing, and we have to be deeply compassionate with ourselves. No blame, no shame, just kind and compassionate that we were doing the best we can, and then hand it over our kids to bring it when they're ready.
Oh, that was such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. And I think even to that point, whether he recognized it or not, that's what he felt he needed. But what that did for you, oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah, that was because I think a lot of times moms put that guilt on ourselves of what we
Mm.
didn't do, the constantness, right? We're not enough. We're not doing enough. We'll never be enough. Am I messing my kids up? So thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm.
Lael, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Do you have any other final thoughts? Anything that maybe you felt like you wanted to say more? I
Mm.
don't know. I felt like we had an amazing
Mm.
conversation. So I don't know what else
Mm.
could have been said,
Thank
but is there
you.
anything else you feel like you want to share or get off your
I
chest?
I just want to say to any mothers listening out here is to really learn to trust your intuition and your gut. You know your child better than anyone, and take the pressure off. There is no perfect, right? We are all kind of working to try and do the best we can, but the best often is about you just being connected to yourself, slowing down, breathing, tuning into you, and then tuning into your kids. That's all our beautiful kids want. They just want our presence and connection. And you've got that, right? You don't need to learn that. You don't have to, do a course to do it or read certain books. Like, just come back to the self, right? Because you are enough just the way you are.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lael. I again appreciate you and continued blessings to you for love and light.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.